Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kate, and apparently book wrap-ups are things that people do, so I've been reading some stuff. Let me tell you about it. This is not all of it, this is some of it. First off, I want to talk about Everything Leads to You by Nina LaCour. This is a young adult contemporary fiction, so it's non-fantasy. It is about a girl who is experiencing the last summer before she goes off to college, and her brother, who works in the film industry, is traveling around the world for movie-related reasons and leaves her his apartment over the summer with the one condition that she has to do something awesome with it while he's gone. She also works in the film industry. She works in production design, but she's an intern, but she gets a job basically on an indie film to run the production design department. So it's about her being really good at her job and about her sort of being in over her head, but figuring out as she goes and really loving the film industry and having this really good best friend that is going to be leaving in the fall to go to school in Chicago, and so she's really sad about that. And so there's this sort of wistfulness about the fact that it's the last summer before college, and there's this excitement about her job, and then there's this girl who comes in that they meet, who's basically the long-lost granddaughter of like fake Clint Eastwood, which is kind of awesome. And it's this lovely romance between the main girl and this new girl, and what I loved about it was that it's not really concerned with identity politics, it's not really concerned with homophobia, it's just this lovely story about two girls who meet and have this connection and, you know, spend a lot of time together and end up falling in love. So I really loved it. So it's called Everything Leads to You by Nina LaCour. Here's the cover again. Okay. And then next on here is Panic by Lauren Oliver. She wrote Delirium, I think? Yes, she wrote Before I Fall in Delirium, which are books that apparently other people have heard of. I've never read them, but I've heard of Before I Fall. And I picked this one up sort of on accident. As you can see, it's an advanced reader copy, so it was just like in the back of the bookstore that I used to work at, and it kind of actually sounded like a dystopia, like a YA futuristic dystopia. And when I was in Barnes & Noble a few weeks later, I was actually there to pick up Everything Leads to You. I saw this book on a shelf with other books, then they were labeled dystopian thrillers. Hilariously, this is not a dystopia. This is actually contemporary fiction, takes place in a real fake small town in upstate New York, I think. But it's about this game that people play called Panic, and it ends up kind of sounding like the Hunger Games from the back of the book / you know, the inside cover. So I can see why people would make that mistake if they hadn't actually read it. But it's about this game where people play throughout the summer. It's all the competing people are in the senior class, so same age ranges, Everything Leads to You, where they're all graduating seniors, and they are doing this series of challenges to win prize money, basically. But the main characters are Heather and Dodge. They're the point of view characters, and they're both competing in the game, and they have sort of different motivations and reasons why they're doing it. And I don't know, it was... my feeling by the end of it was that it was maybe a tiny bit ridiculous as contemporary fiction goes, but it was still fairly enjoyable, and I read it pretty much in a day. So I don't know, yeah, think about checking it out. If it's the kind of thing that you would generally like, then yeah, I would say check it out. The next one on here I've got is, it's the first two books in a series. It's The Darkest Minds and Never Fade by Alexandra Bracken. This series is so amazing. It is actually a YA futuristic dystopia, unlike Panic, which just sounds like it is. But with this one, I actually think that it could survive the third book that usually is the pitfall for most YA futuristic dystopias, because, and I'll explain it a little bit, so I loved it for a few different reasons. The first is that just the world building, it's not really world building, but the history that she builds in, and the actual like plot and setup is actually really cool and really interesting, which is that basically back when the main character was about 9 years old, we find this out through flashbacks, she's 16 at the start of the book. When she's about 9 years old, basically all of the people around 10 to 12, all the kids in her school ages about 10 to 12, start dying in droves. And there's this widespread panic over it. And what they end up finding out is that what the government is really concerned with are just not the fact that I think it was about 90%, although they give a percentage, but I've forgotten exactly what it was, but it was at least 90%, possibly higher. 90% of the children are dying, but that's not actually their concern. Their concern is the people that are left over, because all of the children that are left over develop psychic powers. And so they are categorized by color. So it's green is like really like supernaturally good with tech and like code breaking and things like that. So they're the like least impressive one. Blue is telekinesis, and then yellow is control of electricity. Orange is something similar to telepathy that isn't totally the same thing, but it's like you can manipulate people's thoughts and emotions and actions and memories and choices by touching them. And then red is pyrokinesis, where you can set fires. And so the main character gets sent off to this concentration camp when she turns 10 and doesn't die, and then lives there for the next 6 years of her life. And the author actually does go into what the psychological ramifications of that would be, to be shut up in a concentration camp with constant threat of physical violence and emotional violence done to you for that amount of time. It is a tiny bit of a cheat, because basically it allows this character who has grown up in this world to not know anything about the world, because when she goes out, she doesn't know any of the history. But I still think it really works, and she does actually go into the ramifications of what that would do to you, so it doesn't end up feeling like a cheat, even if it maybe kind of is. So she gets sprung out by what's known as the Children's Coalition, which are people in their about 20s who are working to help the kids that are in the concentration camp, because if you're in your 20s, you're past that cutoff where, you know, you don't have psychic powers and you're not in danger of dying. So she gets sprung out, but then she ends up escaping from them and tagging along with these other 3 psychic kids. Their names are Liam, Charles, who they all call Chubbs, and then Suzume. And that leads me to the other reason that I loved this book, which is the emotional intelligence and the emotional sophistication of these characters was still really believable, and they had very strong emotions, but the fact that they've been through so much, it ends up removing a lot of that shame and a lot of that denial and a lot of just the drama that ends up coming along with most teen novels and teen romances and that kind of thing, where basically I was really concerned that there was going to be a love triangle. There isn't. And there is a romance plotline, but it is very lovely and gratifying and satisfying to read, where they just have this emotional connection, and it ends up sliding into this intimacy that I find really nice to read about. And then her connection with the other 2 isn't diminished. She is incredibly protective over Suzume, who is, you know, much younger than they are. They're all 16, 17. Suzume is about 12. And she has basically gone selectively mute, where she refuses to talk because of what she experienced in the camps. And so Ruby, the main character, feels very protective of her, and she forms this really strong friendship with Chubbs, and this really strong friendship that then ends up turning into a relationship with Liam, and it just, all of it ends up feeling very natural and very satisfying. And there's a moment there's a bridge novella between these 2, which is called In Time, I think. And it's narrated by the point of view of someone in their 20s, who's so sort of outside of this. And he sees these 2 kids who are about 12 or so talking, and they've just met, but he can already tell that they have this deep-seated trust in each other, and they have this deep-seated comfort that they take from each other's presence. And he was saying that maybe being in this situation, what it does to you is that it removes your shame. And so I thought that that was really true in this series, is that they don't have shame over the fact that they need each other, and they trust each other because anyone in their age group is basically going to be one of them. So they have this instant trust and this instant desire to be around each other, and I just ended up really, really loving it. So I am hoping that the 3rd book can continue this. I know that book 3 of YA futuristic dystopias, Hunger Games, Divergent, etc., tend to kind of collapse, but we'll see what happens. I think that this could actually be one that makes it through. I really hope that it does. Just one more time, it's called The Darkest Minds, and it's by Alexandra Bracken. So then one of the other things I've been doing lately is I've been rereading some things, so I'm going to talk really quickly about some of the things I've been rereading. This, by the way, this bookcase, this is my childhood bookcase. This bookcase used to be in my childhood bedroom, and then my parents sold the house, and so I got the bookcase. This is the actual literal bookcase that was in my childhood bedroom for most of my life, actually, and it's organized almost exactly the same as it was when it was in my room. The only things are that there are a couple books that I don't remember exactly where they went, but this is almost the exact same organization. So, one of the things that I've been reading recently are the Circle of Magic books by Tamora Pierce. These I have not read in over half a decade, possibly longer, and I had forgotten how amazing they are. And these are really old covers. You're probably not going to be able to find these anymore. I think I got this one, the first one, Sandry's book, from a Scholastic magazine that they sent to the school. I don't even know if they still do that. Do they still do that? It was like the best thing ever. They would send a magazine to the school, you would take it home, you would order the books that you wanted, and then they would deliver them to your classroom. How cool was that? Anyway, I got this from a Scholastic magazine back in 1997. And so it goes Sandry's book, and then Triss's book, Daja's book, and then Briar's book. And I just recently finished rereading Briar's book yesterday. And the idea of these books is really cool, where it's fantasy done in a way that is very unusual. It's not something that you generally see in a lot of fantasy, where these kids, they're the 4 kids that are the main characters in this book, all have what's called ambient magic, which is basically magic that comes from things around them. So it's not like charms or, you know, spell work that can be studied from books. It's stuff that comes from physical materials. So Sandry is a noblewoman. They're all young kids. She's like, you know, they're all like 10 or so, maybe 12, but they're all pretty young in the start of the book. But so she's a noble girl whose magic comes from thread and from spinning and weaving. And then there's Triss, who is from the merchant class, and her magic comes from the weather. So when she gets angry, it starts hailing indoors and lightning will strike and stuff, so she actually has to work on her emotions and controlling them. She's unapologetically cranky, and I find her to be amazing and hilarious. There's Daja, who is from the trader class, which is slightly different from the merchants, where these are more like traveling traders, where they go in caravans and merchant and ships and stuff. And so her magic comes from metalworking, so she can like touch red hot iron with her bare hands and be fine, stuff like that. And then Briar is basically a street rat thief, and his magic comes from plants. So I really liked the diversity in these books, which I'd known existed when I read them, but I didn't really get how much it mattered that these books were written in the 90s, and they had kids from every different class and from every different ethnic background in these books. As you can tell, that the covers were not whitewashed. Like, you can see that Daja is very clearly black. Let me see if I can get to focus. There we go. So you can see that Daja is black, and Briar is in 2 covers. He's in Sandry's book as well as his own. So this is Briar, and that's Sandry. And then he's also in his own. There we go. So you can see that in his book, you know, he's sort of brown-skinned, and then this is another girl in the book. Her name was Flick, and she's black too. So there's a lot of drama that happens these days about whitewashed covers. It's a serious problem in all fiction, I would imagine, but usually where I see it is in young adult fiction, where characters who are of color in books end up being portrayed as white on the covers in order to make them more marketable. And so I don't know that I really understood how important it was that in the late 90s, early 2000s, there were kids that were very clearly of color on the covers. So I just think it's kind of cool, and something that I think is good for today, even still. It's still relevant. So one thing I do just want to mention, though, remember how I said that these are really, really old, is that I had this stamp that had "This book belongs to." It's a little dragon. And so "This book belongs to," and then I go by Kate now, but at the time I was going by Catherine, so I had my name stamp. These are really old, but I kind of love them. So I will probably keep these until the future when I eventually have children of my own. So yeah, I love these books. Another series that I read probably in around middle school and recently fell back into is the Enchanted Forest Chronicles by Patricia C. Reed. The first one's called Dealing with Dragons, and then it's Searching for Dragons, and then Calling on Dragons, and then Talking to Dragons. And then I have another book here, which is Book of Enchantments, which has a couple short stories from the same world in it, including one that takes place after Talking to Dragons that has the same characters in it. So I sort of count it in the continuation of the whole series. So this one is an extremely tongue-in-cheek, whimsical take on the fairy tale tradition, where basically it's like what would happen if all fairy tales existed at one time in one kingdom, or not one kingdom, but one geographical area, and everyone knew that they were in a fairy tale. So it's stuff like the main character of the first book, her name is Cimarine, and she is a princess. She's very bored with being a princess, and so she decides that she's going to run away and seek her fortune, even though she's not the youngest princess, and that's traditionally who goes off and goes and seeks her fortune, is the youngest princess. But she wants to do it anyway because she's bored, so she leaves and ends up becoming the princess to a dragon, because dragons keep princesses, obviously. And so she ends up getting into all these situations where knights keep coming to try to rescue her from the dragon, and she has to keep telling them, no, she really doesn't want to be rescued. No, she really means it. She is quite happy where she is, thank you very much. And they're not very smart, and they don't believe her, and they think that she's kidding and don't take her seriously in a sort of misogynistic way. And she ends up becoming really good friends with her dragon. Her dragon's name is Kazul. Cimarine helps her organize her library, and she cooks her cherries jubilee, and she also meets this witch named Morwen who refuses to be a proper witch, where she doesn't wear a black pointy hat, and she has many cats, but none of them are black, and she also grows things like daisies in her garden instead of just nightshade. So it's a very tongue-in-cheek series. The one thing I would say about it is that it does kind of go into the thing where Cimarine is not like other girls in a little bit, where she is always talking about how ditzy and airheaded other princesses are, and it can get a little off. I mean, these were written in like the late 80s, early 90s, so it's not super surprising that they would do that, and it really doesn't get that bad, especially considering the fact that these were written late 80s, early 90s. Just, it has hints of it here and there. So it's just something to be aware of, but it's a hilarious series. There is one other thing that I've read that I would want to talk about, but I don't have it in physical form. I read it in an ebook. It was called This Is Not a Test. If I can figure out how to put a picture here, I'll put a picture, but I don't know how to do that, so if someone knows how to do that, tell me. I have iMovie, and I don't know what I'm doing. So basically it's a zombie apocalypse novel that takes place over the course of a few weeks, so I was a little surprised about that because it takes place like right as the zombie uprising is happening. But basically it follows these 6 teenagers who have barricaded themselves inside the high school. And it ends up working surprisingly well. They have the whole school as a range, you know, they stack up tables and chairs and lock all the doors, and they have food and they have water because there's a water tower at the top of the school, and so they don't have any power, but they manage to survive. Most of the book, actually, I would say about 90% of the book takes place inside the high school and takes place without any zombies. And what makes the story interesting is it's more about the character drama, because they have internal battles, and the main character, she actually, right before the zombie apocalypse begins, was trying to commit suicide. And so she's basically the one survivor of the zombie apocalypse who doesn't want to survive. And it's a very interesting place to read a zombie apocalypse novel from the point of view of, because generally It's people who are extremely concerned with surviving, and she's basically trying to find a way to die and to not be a burden on the rest of the people that she's with. So she counts basically just her corpse as being a burden. She doesn't want them to have to deal with her dead body, and she doesn't want to put them in danger by leaving the school, because it could potentially draw zombies to the school. So, like I said, it's a very weird place to read a zombie apocalypse novel from the point of view of, it's a fairly triggering novel because she's clearly not in the most emotionally healthy place. And, you know, she's been dealing with a lot of things in her home life, but again, it's that sort of weird thing where she kind of doesn't want to survive, but she's also not super torn up about the fact that the zombie apocalypse happened, because it means that she's not at home. And we find out a lot of, you know, disturbing things about her home life. So, like I said, it's a very weird place to be reading a survival zombie apocalypse novel. The author described it as like Breakfast Club meets zombies, and that's not totally inaccurate. I liked it better than I liked The Breakfast Club, but I know we're not supposed to not like The Breakfast Club. Okay, last thing I want to talk about, really last thing, is The Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan, it's A Natural History of Dragons, a Memoir by Lady Trent by Marie Brennan. This one is actually adult fiction, for once. It is sort of in the vein of the Naomi Novik Temeraire series, if you know what that is. It's Napoleonic Wars with Dragons. This one is technically otherworld fantasy, but basically she just kind of filed the serial numbers off real places and changed the names in order to protect copyright infringement. So basically the main character, her name is Isabella, is a girl from basically the gentry class who becomes obsessed as a child with dragons. And dragons are real in this world, obviously, but there's not a whole lot of study been done on them. Part of the reason that we find this out is because their bodies start disintegrating pretty much immediately after death, so it's very hard to study them, because by the time you get them back to the lab or what have you, they've basically completely disintegrated. So she becomes obsessed with the study of dragons in a natural history, that Victorian explorer kind of way, where they would, you know, go out into the jungle or what have you and kill animals and taxidermy them and study them and bring them back to museums in order to understand, you know, how bone structure works and stuff like that. So it's kind of funny, actually. She is writing from the point of view of being an old woman, so she's looking back on her young life. This is a series. The second book is out, but I haven't read it yet. I just picked up the first one. I probably will wait for the second one to come out in paperback. It's not something that I'm like so desperate for that I have to go pick up the new one in hardback, but I will pick it up still. I liked it. It has that kind of funny Victorian feel of, you know, natural history and exploration. And the main character, I ended up liking her. I was worried that it was going to do that same not like other girls kind of thing where, you know, she was putting down other women because she wanted to do something that women weren't generally allowed to do, but it mostly stayed away from that, and I was pleased. And she had a really good relationship with her husband, who is part of the reason she gets to go on this adventure. It's the story of her childhood, her marriage, and then their first expedition to an area that's basically Eastern Europe-ish, and the adventures that they have while they're there. So, and you know, her and her husband actually have a really strong relationship. They're not like a really passionate romance, but they have a really strong friendship and camaraderie that I found really satisfying to read. And also it's just kind of fun to read a dragon book that's more about scientific study than magic. So that's really it for this time. I'm starting to lose the light, so I'm gonna cut it short. I can't even remember if there's other stuff that I've read. Probably there has been. I moved and have had a lot of time on my hands, so I've been reading a lot. The one thing that's halted me from reading is that a lot of my book collection is still in boxes. Some of it's unpacked, and maybe I'll show you guys what I have unpacked so far, but a lot of it is still in boxes, and unfortunately I had to cut down the number of bookcases I now have, so some of it's gonna have to stay in boxes until I move again and I'm able to pick up more bookcases, because I'm not even gonna be able to fit it all. I have a book buying problem. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Sorry about the lighting being terrible right now, so I'll end this before it gets even worse and you can't even see my face. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!